Well, there's enough evidence to seriously question whether lockdowns in this pandemic have been effective. You take New South Wales, for instance. It opted to balance a threatened economy with fears of, the virus spreading further and killing more people. I think it's fair to say, despite the fact that there's now a cluster of 17 people in one area, it has handled both superbly. Health studies have also shown recently that the virus is definitely more easily spread if you have a population contained indoors and close together. But we've had other evidence which supports locking down individual hotspots and matching that with intensive testing. Today, the Victorian Ombudsman was scathing of the Andrews government for locking down 3,000 people in a series of public housing towers without notice. Ombudsman Deborah Glass has exposed the Premier on the basis that the drastic and immediate lockdown of residents in towers at Flemington and North Melbourne in July was not based on direct health advice. Evidence from the Deputy Chief Health Officer at the time, Annalise Van Diemen, revealed that the Daniel Andrews government gave her just 15 minutes to sign off on that decision. Now, she pointed to the decision not being compatible with the residents' human rights and even appeared to be contrary to the law.
The lockdown successfully stopped the spread of the virus at the towers. But in my opinion, the immediacy of it was not compatible with the residents' human rights, including the right to humane treatment when deprived of liberty. It appears to me to be contrary to Victorian law, specifically the Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities Act.
It is an extremely harsh finding which could not only see some of the residents from those towers go to the Human Rights Commission, many people have gone to the Human Rights Commission for a lot less, but even mount a class action against the Victorian government. But while this will sound contrary to everything that I have said about the Victorian Premier and his government and how they've handled or mishandled the pandemic in that state, I couldn't disagree more with the Ombudsman. Let's think about what was going on in that week. It was in July, it was July 4, and tests that morning had shown a blowout in the number of families who'd contracted COVID-19 in those towers. Now, there was no disagreement about how easily the virus would spread if nothing were done. Living in such close quarters, the real fear was that almost every occupant in those buildings would eventually test positive, not to mention the tens of thousands of their contacts that each of those residents would come in contact with in their daily routine, in all parts of Melbourne. Andrews was right to call a press conference at 4 p.m. that day to announce the lockdown after sending in police to detain those inside those buildings. No one could leave. He admitted then that a lockdown was a drastic measure and extremely inconvenient and apologised. But think about what would have transpired if, as the Ombudsman and the Deputy Medical Health Officer wanted, he delayed the lockdown for 24 hours, allowing 3,000 people untethered freedom for that time. It would have been pandemonium. Hundreds of residents, many carrying the virus, would have escaped the suburb to avoid the lockdown. That would have seeded COVID-19 in scores of other suburbs of Melbourne. Now, no one wants to be detained by police, especially for what they expected would be at least 2 weeks at the time. Look at how many overseas travellers have escaped or tried to escape quarantine hotels in both Melbourne and Sydney. Very few of those 3,000 would have collected their medicine or food, returned to their apartment and complied with the order if they were given 24 hours notice. In fact, it would have been a far greater bungle than Victoria's first stage 1 hotel quarantine. The virus would have spread like wildfire, maybe even way more than what leaked from those early hotels via staff and travellers. The Ombudsman recommended that the government apologise for the tower lockdown today, but this is how the Housing Minister, Richard Wynne, responded to those damning findings.
We make no apology for saving people's lives.
What about
absolutely no apology for saving people's lives.
I'm sorry, but they come across as arrogant at every turn, don't they? Arrogant to the very end, this mob, but he's right. The Premier would have been understandably hammered for giving those residents any notice before lockdown. It had to be sprung on those residents, or the police would have been detaining just a handful of people in a whole number of towers. It would have been grossly embarrassing. Now, the Ombudsman might think she knows the ins and outs of human rights, but Deborah Glass's background reveals different. Her expertise lies in the adjudication of financial crime, technology breaches, and the investigation of police integrity, not issues related to human rights. None of this, though, takes away from the fact that the Premier's arrogant attitude towards hotel quarantine procedures and his extended broad lockdown in the state were gross examples of mismanagement. But on that difficult decision, taken on July 4 that afternoon, against health advice, Andrews was entirely correct to lock down an extremely dangerous hotspot. If only some of the other premiers had thought about locking down hotspots instead of entire states. The Ombudsman has got this terribly wrong.